All right, guys, check this out. The circle, of realms. I dropped the mic, but it's attached. Greetings, Realm Lords, Core Bricks here, and welcome to another video. And this one, we are going to do it. I'm going to show off the entire game board in its current state here in the Circle of Realms. Now, if you're new to this channel or you just need a general refresher, Circle of Realms is a big, giant, you can tell obviously it's nice and big, giant Lego wargame that I am creating in my home. This is a little bit different from other Lego channels. We were building giant cities or mocks and whatever in their homes, in large part because everything I build actually does get used in a giant wargame that I play with my friends. Absolutely nothing on this table is for display purposes only. I am proud to admit that I am in my 30s and I still actually play with my Legos. I don't just look at them. So today though, I'm not gonna be looking at rules. We're not gonna be looking at any of the factions. We're not gonna be looking at any of the units. Instead, I wanna devote today's video's attention to looking at this beautiful board itself. Now the board has come a long way. If you've been watching my other videos, you may have seen my very first video where I talked about my 10,000 piece Lego wargame board that I put together. And as cool as that video is, that video really just showed me putting together the individual tiles on the game board. So basically at that time, all I was really building was the play surface on the board. Now, of course, I had these beautiful tables assembled, and I do talk about my methodology in that video, and I talked about where I got these pieces from because they aren't all actually official Lego pieces. But for the most part, the end product was just a flat playing surface. Now, you can look around me today, and you can see that this is not a flat playing surface anymore. It's far from complete in the sense that I still definitely want to expand upon the way this board looks. I want to add a few more elevation changes, and I would like to add more details and redo a few of the buildings here and there. But nowadays, I have a fully playable game board with loads of decoration on it, loads of scenery, actual functional buildings and runes and terrain that units can fight on. We've got starting areas for my 4 factions that I have currently. Everything is here, everything is playable, everything is awesome, to quote the Lego movie. And so I want to show you this actual board.
Future me here, I got a little bit sick and lost my voice for a little while, and I may have just been a little bit overly optimistic in general about how much of the board I could fit into one video. So for this video, we'll actually just look at the region of Mauria, and then we'll look at the rest of the Circle of Realms in some future videos. So hey, make sure that you're subscribed so you can see those videos.
Now, if you've watched any of my other videos, you may know that my board is divided up into 4 regions, 4 realms, if you will. And these realms begin with what is right in front of me, which is known as Mauria. Mauria is this beautiful, lush, grassy area. And so let's take a look at what is in Mauria first. Now, Mauria is this grassy region that starts over here. That's everything over here, but that is also this little stretch of grass way back here. Mauria opens up with this little coastal area here. It has a lot of water along its coast. It's very easy for ships to fit and maneuver around all over Mauria. And the centerpiece of this board is, of course, this beautiful temple that I have right here. So the Temple of Waters is like an ancient Greek style temple. I modeled it specifically after some temples I saw in Paestum in southern Italy, but it really just draws inspiration from most Greek temples in the ancient world. And the Temple of Waters is one of 8 different neutral buildings in the Circle of Realms, which you can take over and use to your advantage. This one in particular is used to heal injured units and even resurrect fallen heroes. It's also a pretty good combat piece because units can climb up onto its roof to shoot down on enemies or fight. And they can also crawl back down, and hide behind the columns or under the roof for cover. Now, if you can't tell just from looking at it, this is a building that I definitely designed myself. And this came about because for the longest time, I've had a lot of pieces from old sets that I had in my collection, like Lego Star Wars TIE Fighters from the very first generation. And I had these turbine pieces that I used to make the columns. I had just kind of had them in a bin sitting there, hoping that one day I could find or think of a way that I could repurpose them in a medieval fantasy setting. Because quite frankly, I don't build anything Star Wars related these days. I don't build any spaceships. So I've got to find a way to incorporate them into my game board. And I got this idea of building these columns and using that for the architecture of this building. Now, I didn't have enough to fully enclose the building at this size, so I put a couple of rune columns on one side. And honestly, I really like the look. I like the idea of this ancient collapsed temple on my game board, and I think it came together very nicely. And the access to the upper floor is just, it's awesome. So
So wrapping up the Temple of the Waters, if we move over, we see that it's located next to this kind of watery swamp area. And this is like loosely inspired by my experience on a swamp boat down in New Orleans in Louisiana. So I wanted to incorporate some weird, windy, twisty trees here, which I found online. I did not design these. And little patches of shallow water. Not enough to actually cause the player significant trouble, but they could become a tactical thing to consider since shallow water does slow down units that step into it. Now, the biggest landmark over here is going to be this kind of tree monster thing. It looks kind of like a Trent or an Ent, and I found it at a bricks and minifigure store. I know it's from a Lego set. I don't know which one, and I'm honestly not too interested in looking up which one it is, but I kind of repurposed him into this sitting down sort of Ent creature. I even add little legs onto the side of him. Now, underneath this Ent, we can see that we have a minifigure actually sitting inside this hut, or standing inside this hut, and this is Aina of the Swamp. Now, Aina's a really cool character. She is one of the 4 sages in the Circle of Realms, which is a title that people in the comments came up with on a previous video. And these are my 4 quest givers in the Circle of Realms. So you can go up to Aina and you can get a quest from her. She might have you fetch an item or kill someone or destroy a building or something like that. And if you complete quests for her, she'll give you valuable rewards. And these range from potions that make you stronger all the way up to Aina actually joining your side temporarily and fighting for you on the battlefield. Aina's a cool character. She's like this sort of childish, reclusive witch girl, and all of her spells and abilities involve nature and plants. So she has a spell, for example, that does different things depending on what terrain units are standing on. So if someone's standing on the grass, like the grass that's around her, she can have vines come out of the ground and attack them. But if they're standing in a building, she can instead have the houseplants in the building actually hurl their pots at her enemies. She's a kooky character. I love her. Around Aina's house, I've got this cool circle of mushrooms that I put in for detail. Now, I've got mushrooms in other locations in the Circle of Realms. I try to put them underneath all my trees like I did over here. Basically any dark crevice or shadow. I put a few mushrooms in just to spruce it up a bit. But here around Aina's hut, I've got this big cluster of them to draw attention to her, including this giant mushroom over here. Now, next to this mushroom, I've got this little wooden crate. You'll see crates and barrels and boxes as I kind of move around the Circle of Realms, and those are just areas where we put items onto the battlefield. So when you're moving units around on the battlefield, they can pick up weapons and armor, a new helmet or a new shield or whatever, and put them on and change their stats. These items start on the game board in different boxes like these. After Aina's hut, the water starts to go away and we get these bigger trees that start to take over, and we transition a little bit away from a swamp into a bit more of a foresty area. Now, when I'm making a forest in the Circle of Realms, I'm really just trying to create something that looks like a forest and feels like a forest, but still has plenty of room for people to put their hands in and to move figures around. It's a little bit different from a traditional mock that someone might make on YouTube where they've got a super densely populated forest, because I want hands to actually be able to fit and move through these things. It can't just all be trees everywhere. Now, most of these trees I found online, so I can't really take any credit for their designs. The only ones that I actually made from the ground up are these curvy black trees that I built using dinosaur tail pieces. They're kind of funky looking, a little Dr. Seussy also in how curved they are, but you know, I like them. I think they're pretty charming. My wife, on the other hand, she's not a fan. She thinks they're pretty ugly. But hey, let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you agree with my wife? Do these trees need to go, or do they have some charm to them? Now, next to these trees, we have this sort of ruined wooden building kind of area, and it's got all these green flags on it. So these are the influence flags for the Bloodless Rebellion, which mean that this is the starting area for the rebel units. So if someone's playing as the Bloodless Rebellion, they're going to start here near these flags. Now, by default, my vision is that the rebel player would build all their buildings here next to these flags and around this starting area. But of course, it's up to the rebels what they want to do. If you watched my playthrough, for example, you might remember that the rebel player built their base partially over here, but then partially over at the coast, and they ended up relocating throughout the game. Of course, now that I've added these trees, maybe it's a little bit more tempting to stay back by the forest now that you got this additional cover from all the trees. So southern Mauria is separated from the rest of the region by this river, and I don't want to talk about the river itself because I mean it's a river, it's pretty straightforward, but I do want to talk talk a little bit about these tiles that I've got on it. So I made a video about how I converted my board so that instead of it being just a bunch of individual spaces, it's now a bunch of individual spaces laid out into these 3x3 larger tiles on the board. That works very well for land where I've got all these different colors to pick from between dirt and different shades of grass and all of that. But for water, it's a little bit trickier. I only have 2 shades of water that I own right now, and the lighter shade is used for shallow water and the darker shade is used for deep water. These have a mechanical difference on the game board. So what I did instead, if I pop up a piece for you to look at, is I added these 1x6 tile flat pieces onto each of the plates that are in the water, and I just use these in a pattern to form a grid that extends out into the water, so you can very clearly see the divisions between these larger spaces across the Circle of Realms. I know it's not perfect because the tiles don't perfectly overlap the way that you would want them to form a perfect grid, but the advantage of this system is those 1x6 tiles don't bleed over into other spaces. So you can remove still any space from the water if you're building a building that takes up a space there, or any space from the deep water if you need to for any reason. It's easy for me to just move spaces around without doing larger shifts or taking off and rearranging pieces on those spaces.
Now, if you cross the river and you go farther north into Mauria, we find this open field area. Now, this is a much more open area than southern Mauria is for combat, so you can get like large vehicles in here and large units in here very comfortably, but maybe it's a little bit less interesting to fight on with infantry units. Unless, of course, you're fighting on this rune structure that I've got towards the coastline over here. Now, I just put this in to spruce this place up a little bit, give it a little bit more variety. So we have a structure here that's got 2 upper levels on it that units can fight on, or they can come up here and shoot with a height advantage. It's got a couple barrels here for armor and weaponry that you can find on the battlefield, and it's built out so that it looks like a larger rune structure. I generally put these other runes around it to make it look like it was a larger building that had been runed down. That being said, these other runes that are next to it, they actually come up separately so that any player can build buildings next to and along this structure. They just can't remove the large centerpiece of it. So this is the region where the Cusped Kingdom player really starts the game, and so I wanted there to be a little bit of runes going on here because the Cusped Kingdom has experienced a rebellion and an Anacrean invasion, so for lore reasons it's a little beat up and beat down right now. But I didn't want to fill the region with runes because once the Kingdom player builds their base, I want their base to really tower over everything around them. I don't want it to feel like the Kingdom player is living in this ruined hellscape. I want it to feel like they're living in a thriving city or thriving kingdom. So even the runes that are here, some of it can be removed and torn down, and what's left actually does look like a holistic structure. Now, if you're a big fan of runes and you want to see more runes in the Circle of Realms, don't worry, there is another region that is just littered with runes, and those are there to stay. There's plenty of them all over the place. So make sure that you like and you are subscribed so that you can see that region in a future video. But here in Mauria, I want our attention to be on the majesty of the Cusped Kingdom and not the destruction that it has experienced. Now, that majestic base, of course, is largely going to be built over here, which is the starting area for the Cusped Kingdom, hence all the royal blue flags. And so you can start anywhere in here. They can pop them up here, up on the cliff, or maybe more logically, you can start them down lower at the entrance to the cliff. So units can run out into Mauria and gather resources at the start of the game. Now, this little cliff here is from LEGO Knights Kingdom 2's Castle of Mauria. So if you've been watching any of my videos about the Cusped Kingdom, you know that most of their buildings come from this iconic LEGO set. But I did make some tweaks to this cliff. I built it up a little bit. I added some walls all the way along the sides so that at the beginning of the game it looks like a ruined little settlement, but as you start to build buildings on it, it becomes a more fortified and it looks like a proper castle. Even when you just have 1 or 2 buildings here, it still looks like a little fortified building, just not quite as majestic as it can be in its prime. And so you can pop off all these little 4 corners to make room for the different buildings that the Cusped Kingdom player can build. And at the very center, you can put the Aquiline Hall as well and build up from there. This little black piece at the bit, it comes off if you want to access the area down below, but you don't actually build anything on it and you don't remove it from the game ever. It's just there for our big hands to be able to move units around when we're playing the game. Unlike the original set, I did actually wall off the back side to this whole cliff area. That way units can only enter in from the front, and that is one of the big advantages of being the Kingdom player. If you build your castle here at its starting position, you can really only be attacked from this narrow choke point entrance that only 2 units can walk through at a time. And this gets even easier to defend if you make it to the final tech age. You can build a gate here that really keeps units out until they break down the gate, and then units can charge in through this narrow choke point, while you've got units up above that can shoot down at them. Now there's still a little bit more to Mauria if you follow this tiny little stretch along the snow. And this is the far eastern area of Mauria, an area where no players actually start. Now, like southern Mauria, this is another very foresty area. It's dense with trees. It's probably a little bit denser than trees, actually, or it is a little bit denser with trees than southern Mauria is. But just like southern Mauria, there's a lot of room here for you to put your hand onto the battlefield and move it between things. So it looks like a forest, but you know, it's also not crazy dense like a forest might be in a mock. Now the whole reason why this is a forest is because this is where the Wood Elves are going to be, our Sylvan Refuge, which is the second neutral building in the realm of Mauria. So while the Temple of the Waters gave you the ability to heal and resurrect units, the Sylvan Refuge gives you the ability to train new units altogether. This is where you can train 2 types of units, the Sylvan Blessed, which are like these blade dancers, and Sylvan Rangers or Hunters, I forget exactly what they're called, but they're your typical elves with bows and arrows and all that good stuff. The Sylvan Refuge also has doors on the front that can be open and closed to keep attackers out. While they're closed, attackers can only get in from the back side, which is through shallow water. So even though they can still enter, they travel much more slowly through that water, and they're a little bit easier to pick off with your Sylvan Bowmen. And if you watched my last playthrough video, you may recall that that's one of the reasons why this area in particular saw a lot of action, because it was very easily fortified, and me and my ally were able to take it over and use it as a point to hold off against our opponents. The Sylvan Refuge also has this really cool catapult up on the top. You can't really see it. It's kind of disguised in with these trees, but you can fire from it and it just kind of works and functions. I love it. Now, I definitely can't take any credit for the design of this catapult or most of this building in general, because it is based on a Lord of the Rings or Hobbit set. I think it was the Mirkwood Battle Pack or something like that. All I did was I took that set and I built it out a little bit more. I added in the gate, I added in some details, and I kind of made it wrap a little bit around it to make a small little tiny refuge. I'll probably revisit this at some point in the future to make it look a little bit better, but for now, it definitely serves its purpose in my game. Now there's one more interesting feature in Mauria, and it is the last thing we're gonna look at this video. It is this little cliffy looking thing with all these branches on top of it, and this is actually a giant nest for a giant eagle. Specifically Vernicus the giant eagle, who is an unlockable unit that the kingdom can get later on in a game if they're doing things very well. In my playthrough video, Vernicus actually came out onto the field, so we saw him in action there. Most unlockables in the Circle of Realms have some sort of a requirement to get them out onto the field. You usually have to bring a unit somewhere or do something in particular, and for Vernicus, it typically involves going to his nest over here. And so units can stand up on it and move up onto it to summon the giant eagle. Now, I'll be the first to admit that Vernicus's nest is probably the most ugly of all the things I have built for the Circle of Realms right now. I would say across all the realms, it's just the least detailed. It uses those big ugly rock pieces that everyone's so upset about all the time. But I just wanted to put something together very quickly so that I could get Vernicus into the game and get the game rolling. This is something I'll probably update at a later time when I've got a lot more energy to commit to building out a really cool looking nest feature. Probably after I actually build up the mountain cliff next to it, since I want all that snow to be raised up as well. All right, my friends, that just about concludes our tour of Mauria. Thank you for watching. As always, please make sure you're subscribed. If you really want to support this channel, you can check out my Patreon, which is linked below as well. And stay tuned, because next we will be looking at Legna, which is right to the left of me. So we'll take a deep dive into Legna and all it has to offer, and we'll work our way to Tordrim and Surla as things go. But until then, my friends, be happy, be healthy, be well, and I'll see you next time right here in the Circle of Realms.